Welcome, everyone. I'm Pete Rizzo, editor-at-large at Kraken, the best place to buy and sell Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and I'm your host for this special edition Kraken live stream. To discuss the day's trending topics, I'm joined by Tomas Perfumo, Director of Strategy at Kraken. Tomas will be joining us shortly to discuss his outlook on the Bitcoin and crypto market, but first, some data highlights from our latest Kraken report, Crypto in Review 2020 Year of the Bull, available to download now at blog.kraken.com. So if you're new to the market, our team of analysts have compiled an in-depth guide to catch you up on market activity. Here are some of their top trends from the year that was. Evolving market structure. As the crypto market continues to mature, the derivatives market is likely to continue to outpace spot volumes. This, coupled with the rise of new derivative instruments, could lead to an increase in market fragility. Next up, regulatory activity. Central banks are ramping up efforts on central bank digital currencies in line with rising demand. Yet, while regulators and governments were more involved in the crypto space, a few formal rule changes have been implemented. Lastly, DeFi rising. The quiet rise of decentralized finance and stablecoins in 2019 set the stage for astronomical growth in market momentum in the second half of 2020, as blockchains with support for smart contracts such as Ethereum served as launchpads for open financial applications. Once again, you can read our full Crypto in Review 2020, Year of the Bull, and get more facts, insights, and trends on blog.kraken.com. Now, our guest, Tomas. Tomas, how are you?
Doing great. How are you?
Doing well, enjoying the year, exciting already, and definitely want to pick up there. So maybe you can take our listeners into, you've covered the extent of activity in 2020. What do you think was the biggest change for investors looking at the market over the last year?
Yeah, I think the biggest change that we talk about in the note as well in greater depth is really the maturation of the crypto industry as an asset class. In particular, this kind of quote unquote institutional adoption wave. It was something that when I joined the industry in 2017, everyone was getting really excited and pumped up about, but it never fully materialized. And it was always seen as kind of this fringe asset class that people really questioned whether it had any kind of legitimacy. This past year has been insane in terms of just the narrative shift from, this kind of fringe, quote unquote, criminal currency to an asset class that's actually potentially a superior inflation hedge to than gold, for example. And coupled with the fact that we've had such a dramatic, unprecedented movement in terms of fiscal and monetary decisions, I think it just set up perfectly for this kind of like actual shift in terms of the institutional adoption and seeing a lot of the brand players, the blue chip players in the investment space coming in and saying, no, Bitcoin and Ethereum are here to stay, and we think we should have an allocation to them.
The report spends a good amount of time also talking about the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on the markets in general and also the crypto markets. What do you think the lasting impact of that will be? Obviously still ongoing. What is the impact in 2021 of this continued situation? And what are your thoughts on whether that continues to stay with us through the year?
Yeah, undeniably, the thing that COVID-19 brought in 2020 was this massive economic shock to the demand side and also the supply side of the macro economy that just led to this kind of this de facto unprecedented shift in terms of fiscal and monetary policy addresses. Like, for example, the US Fed increased their balance sheet by north of 75% over the course of like 6 to 8 months. That's massive. We had US money supply grow by 25% last year alone. We had similar metrics out in Europe, a little bit more suspended because of how their governing system works and the bureaucracy around it. But nonetheless, in our core markets anyway, massive changes in terms of how money is introduced into the system, massive amounts of fiscal stimulus. I think the really important takeaway is that we don't see, at least on the monetary side, any real shift from the stance going through 2023 at this point. And that's really signaled by conversations that the Fed is having publicly. And so you're going to have, I think, continuance of this impact really brought on by COVID-19, reflecting in markets broadly and also impacting crypto because it fits that narrative of, scarcity of money, sound money, and the applicability of crypto towards that. And on the fiscal side, looking forward, I think the real news here is that with the with the runoff elections, at least in the U.S., around the Senate, and now the Democrats taking full control of the administration, but also the Congress, you're going to have a lot more, I think, legislation moving through and fairly quickly around stimulating the economy, and that's probably going to take the form in terms of massive fiscal stimulus. Already seeing, the proposal for $1 trillion plus additional stimulus packages being lined up. A lot of it having to do with extension of benefits and checks for people and individuals. I kind of feel the same way is going to happen or play out back in Europe, where you're going to see expansions of this as well. So that's really going to be the lasting impact. And I think the question really is going to be, how effective is the vaccination, of this virus, and how long is it going to take to get that distribution out before we can get to an economy that's stable, and therefore reduces the need for some of these measures. But it's going to take, I think, another 1 to 2 years for that to really kick in and get us back on track economically.
Interesting. Yeah, we've talked about the narrative development, obviously important, and we've seen the institutions gravitate towards Bitcoin. There were some recent headlines, I think from NYDIG, just saying institutions are only looking at Bitcoin. Do you expect that to change this year, especially given that you mentioned the excitement about what's going on in the broader cryptocurrency space?
Yeah, I think there are some, I would say, like adventurous institutions that see a place for Ethereum too. I'm not sure that they see it in the same context as Bitcoin in terms of Bitcoin potentially being a form of gold or an inflation hedge. But I think broadly, people do recognize that Ethereum does have some level of beta or correlation with Bitcoin performance, and so it's kind of like a rising tide lifts all boats story in some extent. And they might look at Ethereum as an even smaller asset within the cryptocurrency space where they can build a position. And so they might look to allocate there because they see some level of outperformance. Of course, there are institutions that might be a little bit more familiar with the space and see a lot of that interest in terms of open finance, smart contract applications, and trying to build a position around that as well. I think less so in terms of the very traditional macro investors that are really focused more on things like inflation trends, for example. That said, one of the interesting things about this year that's going to be a little bit nuanced is that I believe the CME is intending to roll out futures contracts as early as next month for Ethereum. And that's going to be, like Bitcoin, or like it was for Bitcoin, a game changer in terms of the people who are going to be able to access exposure to Ether in a way that they traditionally can't in the spot markets.
Next question would be, are we in a bull market? The report's titled "Year of the Bull." Some media headlines suggesting that might not be the case anymore for Bitcoin and crypto assets. Your take?
Yeah, I think. Well, I think we cannot deny that we're in a bull market. I think the major question is going to be how far can it continue? At least from my perspective, I'm not a short-term trader, so take it with a grain of salt. But one of the most interesting and fascinating things to me about the recent price action is that back in 2017, when it jumped to 20,000, was that really the all-time high? You can say that, but at the same time, it came back down to like 13, 14,000 within maybe an hour or two. And so the price stability at those levels was much, much less so than what we've seen in the past few months. I think I was a little bit afraid in the last few months that we might not be able to hold something like 20,000 as well as we did in 2017. And I was dead wrong about that. I think what I've been pleasantly surprised by is that any kind of pullback seems to get bought up within a day or two. And we're, already kind of crawling back up. And seeing also, rotations in and out of Bitcoin into the altcoin space as well. So I think undeniably we're in a bull market. I think, the media, likes to play on the volatility. It's a great eye grabber for them. But that said, who knows what it's going to be. I think, again, my viewpoint is that this past year has really cemented the narrative of cryptocurrencies, and it's a very relatively small asset class. So sky's the limit from here, I think.
Interesting. Of course, lots of insights in the report about 2020. A little bit interested to hear how you're thinking about 2021 so far and then going forward. In your opinion, what do you think will be the biggest narrative coming into this year and throughout this year for the industry?
Yeah, I think, what I liked about 2020 in terms of like a development standpoint, a tech standpoint, was this fascination around DeFi. And for me, the narrative shift there from at least my experience the past few years is that you had a lot more activity on the development front. in a fairly aggressive and experimental way. Whereas, the ethos of Bitcoin, for example, and what I've always felt stemmed into other applications has been slow and steady, build it, test it, get it audited by pen testers and et cetera, contract auditors, and then roll it out when you feel like really good about it. In a lot of cases, we had like fly-by-night projects come in and say, I'm developing this new solution, come check it out. And immediately it got a ton of attention and adoption in that sense. Obviously, it comes at the cost of some of the smart contract issues that we saw, as talked about in the report in some extensive manners. And I think I'm personally excited to see whether that's going to continue or not into 2020. In particular, around some of the new smart contract ecosystems that are being built up. Polkadot is an example of this, where this year is going to be, I think, a big year for them in terms of developing out that kind of smart contract functionality and trying to get to parity with Ethereum in terms of activity. I think another aspect that I'm really interested in is just seeing how institutions continue to move forward into this space, whether they're going to pick certain products and services. As an example, I'm a little bit surprised to see some of the institutions being interested in spot crypto, whereas historically they've probably had the flexibility in their mandate and the ability to buy the futures contracts for a number of years now. And so it'll be interesting to see how they come in that manner. And then lastly, I think I'm still very interested in seeing the evolution of stablecoins, particularly from a government perspective in terms of their allowance for stablecoins to proliferate, but also from a CBDC perspective and seeing how they might look to accelerate some of the development there and research there to try to make sure they have hegemony over a stablecoin space or market.
Yeah, very interesting. It'll be certainly interesting to watch. Kind of bringing it up into summation, obviously people who read this report are going to get a great overview of the last year, a really condensed version of the major narratives, as well as what we see as our conclusions. I'd like to look ahead again. Looking ahead, what's your boldest prediction for the next 12 months? Maybe you can give us something where you think this is how it's going to be, and this is the Tomas Perfimo prediction.
For a price target?
Just anything, right? What's your boldest prediction for the year ahead?
This is a great question. I think what I'm most interested in is going to be to see again like how this institutional wave continues to mature. It's still such a young trend that we're seeing. It's really only started in the last 6 months. I think when I talk about institutions, I break it down into two parts. You have the investment community, which I think is interesting, but it tends to be a little bit more one-time-ish. Like, let's build a position. They might do it slowly over time, and so I think that kind of plays out when we see these pullbacks that get bought. We might have some folks who are getting a little bit more aggressive on the pullbacks and just trying to average their cost in. But that tends to be one time. Like once these guys build a position, they sit on it and they don't do much else. I think what's going to be really interesting and what I'm looking forward to is seeing enterprises get into this space in a meaningful way, whether that's, again, fintech applications, which I think have just an incredible macro trend for the next few years. I mean, Kraken is also looking to play a role, like, for example, with our SPDI in this kind of space. And so there's just going to be a massive opportunity there. Just seeing folks like PayPal, like Cash App, becoming more interested in the cryptocurrency space is going to be, I think, what I'm most curious and I think is going to be a bigger story in 2021. So I'm really interested to see that kind of expansion in terms of people getting access for the first time to crypto through applications they're quite used to and trust.
Very interesting, and obviously we'll be following along at Kraken. Tomas, why don't you give people an idea? What kind of reports are you putting out? How can people get more access to information on Kraken?
Yeah, absolutely. So we do have a set of subscription pages that you can sign up for. So you can go to that on kraken.com/subscribe/intelligence. And that'll give you a web form that you can toggle different types of reports. We offer monthly content in the form of market recaps, great commentary there that relates things to traditional markets as well, like equities, bonds, etc. That's something that we do particularly well on the research side. We have a couple newsletters that'll get you appraised on the latest trends and information that we're picking up on and taking a look internally here at Kraken. We also have a trader report, the OTC Daily, that's a little bit more chart focused, trend focused, and leaders and laggards of the day. And then lastly, we publish a lot of these what I call ad hoc reports, but they're really deep dive reports that go into these different topics. This crypto and review note is one of them, but we've done things like asset notes, primers, when it comes to crypto yields and whatnot. So be on the lookout for that stuff. You can find it on our blog. We'll tweet about it, but do subscribe to those pages and you'll be able to get that in your inbox as soon as it's out. So I would say that's how to best follow our content.
Great. Yeah, I love the work that you guys are turning out, and really just looking better and better even thumbing through this report. Beautiful charts, lots of great graphics, and think it's definitely something that anybody who's new to the space or even just wants a comprehensive review, of everything that happened. Such an exciting year. Certainly download that. So once again, everybody, you can read our full crypto and review 2020, the year of the bull report on kraken.com. It's free. Access more great Kraken Intelligence on blog.kraken.com or on our emails and everything that Tomas just said. So looking forward to having you for more streams this year, Tomas, and following all the ups and downs along the way.
Likewise. Thank you so much.